New York's economic empire is crumbling faster than autumn leaves in Central Park. And if you own property in the Empire State, what's happening in these 10 cities could be racing toward your neighborhood next, turning million-dollar dreams into abandoned nightmares. While Manhattan's skyscrapers still gleam, upstate communities are hemorrhaging residents at rates not seen since the Great Depression, with home values crashing 20% or more in just 18 months. Rochester leads this exodus with 15,000 residents fleeing in 2024 alone. Rochester was supposed to be the poster child for post-industrial reinvention, transforming from Kodak's ghost town into a thriving tech hub that could compete with Silicon Valley's satellites. Instead, the Flower City has become a cautionary tale of how quickly modern prosperity can evaporate when global economic forces shift against you. The numbers tell a devastating story. Home values have plummeted 22% in just 18 months, crashing from $145,000 to a brutal $113,000. That's a $32,000 loss, wiping out years of equity for homeowners who believe Rochester's tech renaissance was real and sustainable. But the real crisis runs deeper than housing prices. Over 3,500 tech jobs disappeared as companies like Paychex and Carestream relocated operations to Austin and Raleigh, where business costs are lower and talent pools are expanding. When your economic foundation shifts to states offering better incentives, entire neighborhoods feel the impact immediately. Walk through downtown Rochester today, and you'll see the evidence everywhere. The vacancy rate has exploded to 41% as major retailers, including Macy's and Barnes and Noble, shuttered their flagship locations, leaving behind empty storefronts that collect dust instead of sales tax revenue. The population exodus accelerated dramatically in 2024, with 15,000 residents packing up and leaving, the largest single-year decline in Rochester's modern history. These aren't just statistics on a spreadsheet. They're teachers, nurses, and young professionals who represent the city's future economic potential. While Rochester struggles with tech exodus, another upstate city faces different but equally devastating challenges. Syracuse built its modern identity around being a classic college town where the university anchored a thriving local economy, but that foundation is cracking under pressures that university spending alone can't solve. What happens when your brightest graduates see their hometown as a launching pad to somewhere better rather than a place to build their careers? The brain drain statistics are staggering. 67% of Syracuse University graduates now leave the area immediately after graduation, taking their education, energy, and earning potential to cities like Boston, Washington, D.C., and Charlotte. That's 2 out of every 3 new degree holders voting with their feet against Syracuse's economic prospects. The housing market reflects this demographic exodus perfectly. Median home prices have fallen 16% from $129,000 to just $108,000, a $21,000 loss that signals weakening demand from the young professionals who typically drive urban housing markets. Manufacturing job losses have accelerated the decline, with 2,200 positions eliminated since 2023 as companies relocate to southern states offering lower costs and newer facilities. When you lose both your college graduates and your blue-collar jobs simultaneously, entire neighborhoods start emptying out. The school district crisis tells the broader story. Facing a $34 million budget deficit, administrators are cutting programs and consolidating schools as enrollment drops. When families see education quality declining, they start looking elsewhere for their children's futures, creating a downward spiral that becomes increasingly difficult to reverse. The Rust Belt decline extends beyond traditional manufacturing centers to cities that once seemed immune. Utica was hailed as America's most successful refugee resettlement story, welcoming thousands of immigrants who revitalized declining neighborhoods and opened new businesses throughout the Mohawk Valley. But population growth without economic foundation creates its own devastating problems when good intentions collide with economic reality. The housing market tells the story of oversupply meeting weak demand. Inventory has surged 89% with over 1,400 active listings, which is flooding a market that simply can't absorb them. When you have nearly twice as many homes for sale as buyers with stable income, prices collapse regardless of federal resettlement funding. Property values have declined 19% as demand evaporated, leaving homeowners underwater on mortgages they took out during Utica's brief demographic boom. The city added residents faster than it could create jobs to sustain them, creating an unsustainable economic equation that's now correcting itself brutally. Healthcare infrastructure is buckling under the strain. Two major hospitals were forced to merge operations as patient volumes overwhelmed capacity, while reimbursement rates couldn't cover expanded services. When basic healthcare becomes unreliable, families start considering relocation regardless of community ties or federal assistance programs. Youth unemployment has reached 28%, driving massive out-migration among second-generation immigrants and longtime residents alike. Young people who grew up believing Utica represented opportunity are discovering that demographic growth without economic development creates poverty, not prosperity. Drive through neighborhoods that seemed revitalized just 5 years ago, and you'll see the evidence of this reversal everywhere. Even cities with federal support programs face insurmountable economic headwinds. Albany seemed bulletproof as New York's capital city, where steady government paychecks and stable employment created a reliable economic foundation that weathered previous recessions better than most upstate communities. But what happens when the government itself becomes the problem, not the solution? Remote work policies have gutted Albany's commercial core like a precision strike. Vacancy rates have exploded to 31% as state employees work from home permanently, leaving downtown office buildings eerily empty and small businesses without their primary customer base. When your economic anchor disappears into cyberspace, the ripple effects devastate everything connected to it. The residential market is collapsing alongside the commercial sector. Home sales volume has plummeted 44% year over year as government workers realize they can live anywhere while keeping their Albany salaries. Why pay New York taxes and heating bills when you can work remotely from North Carolina or Florida? Restaurant and hospitality sectors have borne the brunt of this transformation, losing 1,800 jobs as lunch crowds and business travelers vanished virtually overnight. Walk through downtown Albany during what used to be the busy lunch hour, and you'll see shuttered cafes and half-empty restaurants struggling to survive on weekend dinner crowds alone. Median home prices have fallen 14% from $198,000 to just $170,000, a $28,000 loss that reflects weakening demand from the government workers who traditionally anchored Albany's housing market. Government cities face unique vulnerabilities as work patterns shift permanently. Schenectady earned the nickname Electric City when General Electric made it the birthplace of American industrial innovation, powering the nation's growth for over a century with steady jobs and cutting-edge technology. But when your century-old economic foundation finally pulls the plug, the lights go out across an entire community. General Electric's final exodus eliminated 2,100 remaining positions, completing a corporate retreat that began decades ago, but accelerated dramatically in 2024. These weren't just assembly line jobs, but engineering positions, research roles, and administrative functions that supported hundreds of local businesses and service providers throughout the Mohawk Valley. The municipal budget crisis tells the brutal story of economic dependency. Property tax revenue has dropped 18% as GE's massive facilities sit empty and residential values collapse, forcing the city to cut essential services, including road maintenance, park programs, and library hours. When your largest taxpayer disappears, every remaining resident feels the impact through deteriorating public services. Manufacturing employment has fallen to its lowest level since the 1940s, a statistic that captures 8 decades of industrial decline compressed into just 2 devastating years. The skilled machinists, electrical workers, and technicians who built Schenectady's middle class are relocating to states where their expertise still commands premium wages. Home foreclosures have increased 156% year over year as families lose both their jobs and their ability to maintain mortgage payments. Drive through neighborhoods that once housed GE executives and engineers, and you'll see foreclosure notices posting on lawns where children played just months ago. Industrial legacy cities can't compete in the modern economy without massive reinvestment. Binghamton built its modern revival around the university, transforming from a declining industrial city into a college town where students and faculty provided economic stability that seemed recession-proof. But when higher education itself enters crisis mode, even the most academically dependent communities discover their foundation isn't as solid as they believed. Student enrollment has plummeted 12% as SUNY administrators consolidate programs and relocate departments to campuses in Albany and Buffalo, where operational costs are lower. When you lose over 2,500 students in a single academic year, every business from pizza shops to bookstores feels the immediate impact on their bottom line. The faculty exodus has been even more devastating. 23% of professors departed in 2024 alone, taking their expertise, research grants, and spending power to universities offering better facilities and career prospects. These aren't just statistics, they're the community leaders who coached Little League teams, served on city councils, and anchored Binghamton's intellectual life. Local business revenue has collapsed 31% without university spending, forcing restaurant closures, retail downsizing, and service reductions throughout the downtown corridor. When your primary customer base shrinks by a quarter overnight, survival becomes impossible for businesses that thrived on student and faculty spending patterns. Housing demand has evaporated, with properties staying on market 47% longer than previous years. Landlords who built portfolios around student rentals are slashing rents and still struggling to fill apartments as enrollment continues declining. Educational institutions can't single-handedly sustain entire cities when broader economic forces shift. Elmira became an unlikely economic success story by embracing what other communities rejected, building prosperity around correctional facilities that provided stable employment and steady tax revenue for decades. But when criminal justice reform meets budget constraints, communities built on incarceration discover their foundation can vanish almost overnight. Correctional facility closures eliminated 1,400 jobs directly, wiping out the largest employer in Chemung County and devastating families who built careers around New York's prison system. These weren't minimum wage positions, but union jobs with benefits, overtime opportunities, and pension plans that supported middle-class lifestyles in an otherwise struggling region. The ripple effects spread far beyond the prison walls. Related service jobs in food delivery, prisoner transport, legal services, and facility maintenance cost another 800 positions as the entire ecosystem that supported Elmira's correctional economy collapsed. When you lose 2,200 jobs in a community of 27,000 residents, the math becomes impossible for local businesses to survive. Population decline followed employment losses with devastating speed. 8% of residents relocated in 2024 alone as families packed up for regions offering better job prospects. That's over 2,000 people voting with their feet against Elmira's economic future, taking their spending power and tax contributions with them. Commercial property values have crashed 29% as empty storefronts multiply throughout downtown Elmira. Drive through the business district and you'll see the evidence everywhere, from abandoned strip malls to for-lease signs that stay up for months without interest. Single industry towns face existential threats when their economic foundation disappears. Watertown thrived for decades as Fort Drum's civilian partner, where military families shopped, dined, and lived off base, creating a symbiotic relationship that seemed to guarantee economic stability regardless of broader economic trends. But when Pentagon budget cuts target your primary economic lifeline, even the most patriotic communities discover that military spending can disappear as quickly as it arrived. Military personnel reductions eliminated 2,800 positions at Fort Drum, representing the largest downsizing since the base's expansion during the Iraq War. These cuts didn't just affect soldiers, but their families, dependents, and civilian contractors who formed the economic backbone of Jefferson County's consumer spending patterns. Off-base housing demand has collapsed with devastating speed. Property values have plummeted 21% as military families receive permanent change of station orders to bases in Texas, Georgia, and overseas assignments. When your primary home buyers suddenly get orders to relocate across the country, local real estate markets can't adjust fast enough to prevent massive value losses. Retail and service businesses have lost 35% of their customer base virtually overnight. Walk through Watertown shopping centers and you'll see the immediate impact. From restaurants cutting hours to car dealerships struggling with inventory, they can't move to a shrinking population of potential buyers. Local tax revenue has declined, forcing infrastructure delays on road repairs, school improvements, and municipal services that were planned when Fort Drum's future seemed secure. When your tax base relocates to other states by military order, recovery timelines stretch far beyond normal economic cycles. Military-dependent communities face boom-bust cycles beyond their control. Jamestown once crafted furniture for America's finest homes, where generations of skilled woodworkers built solid middle-class lives, creating quality pieces that lasted decades rather than years. But when global supply chains prioritize speed over craftsmanship and consumers choose disposable furniture over heirloom quality, entire communities built on traditional manufacturing watch their economic foundations splinter like cheap particle board. The last major furniture manufacturer closed its doors in 2024, eliminating 950 jobs and ending over a century of continuous production in Chautauqua County. These weren't just assembly line positions, but skilled craftsmen whose expertise took years to develop and can't be easily replaced by automation or overseas production. The skilled workforce exodus has been devastating for local expertise retention. Master woodworkers, upholsterers, and finishing specialists have relocated to North Carolina's Furniture Triangle or accepted overseas positions in Vietnam, where their knowledge commands premium wages. When you lose generations of accumulated skill, rebuilding becomes nearly impossible, even if economic conditions improve. Downtown transformation attempts have failed spectacularly, with vacancy rates reaching 52% as businesses close faster than new ones open. City officials invested millions in facade improvements and streetscape beautification, but cosmetic changes can't overcome the fundamental problem of no economic reason for people to visit or invest in Jamestown's commercial district. Home values have dropped 24% as employment options disappeared, leaving homeowners trapped in properties worth less than their mortgages in a community with limited economic prospects. Specialized manufacturing towns can't adapt quickly enough to global market shifts. These 10 cities aren't isolated failures, crumbling in geographic vacuum. They're interconnected pieces of New York's economic foundation that's shifting beneath the entire upstate region. When economic collapse spreads across multiple communities simultaneously, the ripple effects reshape state politics, budgets, and long-term viability in ways that affect every New York resident, regardless of zip code. The combined population loss of 89,000 residents represents $2.1 billion in lost economic activity that won't return easily or quickly. These aren't just statistics on a spreadsheet, but teachers, nurses, engineers, and small business owners who took their spending power, tax contributions, and entrepreneurial energy to states actively recruiting New York's talent. Tax revenue shortfalls are forcing service cuts that affect remaining residents through reduced snow plowing, library closures, and delayed infrastructure repairs. When multiple municipalities simultaneously cut services, the quality of life deterioration accelerates the exodus of residents who still have relocation options. Brain drain has reached crisis proportions as young professionals flee for growth markets in Texas, Florida, and North Carolina, where their skills command similar salaries, but housing costs remain manageable. The demographic shift leaves behind aging populations with higher service needs and lower tax-generating capacity. Infrastructure decay creates additional barriers to economic recovery when businesses considering upstate locations discover unreliable broadband, deteriorating roads, and aging water systems that require massive capital investment. Without young workers and growing businesses, these 10 cities become permanent examples of New York's decline rather than temporary casualties of economic transition.